I think he's really sensing something he didn't see before, which is his own mortality, and he wants to change the world, not just be the center of attention. That's why he's building a 90,000 square foot ballroom at the White House. That's why he's desperate to get the Nobel Peace Prize. That's why he's transforming much of the rest of the White House. He wants to people to confront the fact that he's there and the world is not going to be the same, because he was there.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Couric, and this is Next Question. My guest today, Jonathan Karl, is ABC News chief Washington correspondent and co-anchor of This Week. He has covered every president since Bill Clinton, but none more closely than the current administration. His latest book picks up hours after Trump's reelection in 2024. When operating on virtually no sleep, John calls Donald Trump on his cell phone, and surprisingly, the president-elect picks up. What follows is a revealing and unsettling look at power, loyalty, and the forces that are reshaping our democracy. Jonathan Karl, a.k.a. John Karl, great to see you. Thank you so much for spending some time with me talking about your new book. By the way, how do you have time to write a book when you're covering the Trump administration?
I mean, my God, I don't know. I really don't know. I've now written, I think one of my daughters added it up. I think it's 1,500 pages, 4 different books. The first one while he was in office the first time. I don't know. This one almost killed me, though. This was a heavy lift.
Well, these are very different times than your previous books. And I think, we hear the word, John, unprecedented constantly, but it almost seems to be used on a daily basis. Let's start at where your book opens, though. November 6, 2024. It's the day after President Trump's election to his second term. You've just returned to your hotel room after being up for more than 24 hours of election night coverage, and you decide to give the president-elect a call. What happened?
It's a strange thing. I mean, the context is I had been talking to him over the phone throughout the fall campaign, which again is something that I talk about unprecedented. I mean, and I didn't do it on his previous campaigns. It just started happening.
How did you get his number, by the way?
I had his number. Somebody gave it to me, more than a year earlier. I'd never really used it because if I wanted to get a hold of him, I went through somebody else. And the first time I called him directly was after he was shot in Butler, and I just wanted to leave a voicemail message and say, I'm really horrified and sorry about what happened, and I hope you're feeling okay. And in this case, the election happens. Again, you know what it's like, Katie, to be round the clock coverage, and then you have to do the morning show. And then, I was dead tired, but I figured I would call and leave him a voicemail message to just say basically congratulations. I mean, I had written a book about his attempts to overturn the last election. It was called Betrayal. I had warned that he posed a threat to American democracy. I had done all this stuff. I'd infuriated him with much of what I had said in my reporting. But I figured at this point I should call and say, you won. Congratulations. And to my total shock, 7:30 in the morning, he has been up all night. He has an administration to put together right now. He's just won the presidency again, and he answers the phone. He's like, hello. And sometimes when I call him, he would say, hey, Jonathan, what's up? And sometimes, which was always weird because, like, does he have my number? Is he but other times he would act like he had no idea who was calling. This time he acted like he had no idea. And I just said, hello, Mr. President-elect. I'm just calling to say congratulations. And he pauses and he says to me, on what? On what, Jonathan? You tell me. On what? And he sounded, at first I laughed. I thought he was joking, but he wasn't joking.
What do you mean?
Well, to me, he wanted to hear me say it. He wanted to hear me say that he had won this great victory. It was like in Breaking Bad, that scene when Bryan Cranston's character, Walter White, has vanquished the other drug dealers, and they meet out on the desert to, like, pay their, respects, and Walter White, Cranston says, "Say my name." And Trump wanted to hear me say it, so I said it. I said, "Congratulations on the greatest comeback victory in the history of American politics." I mean, it's what it was. I
And
mean,
what did he
what
say after that? Did he
he
say,
said, "Oh,
"Thank
yeah."
you"?
Then he was like, "Oh, well, thank you very much. It was really quite a victory. It was quite a victory. It was very nice of you to say that." So, yes, but at first he was like, "Come on, come out with it. What did I do?"
It's interesting because you all have developed a fascinating relationship. I know that he has labeled you, and you write about this, a third rate reporter. He's called you a real scumbag. He's declared you will never make it. Um, he did answer a lot of your calls in the lead up to the election. But do you think part of this is performative, that the way he talks to someone publicly is really for consumption by the MAGA crowd, and that he has less animosity when he's talking to you on the phone?
There's absolutely no question about it. My very first book was Front Row at the Trump Show, and I described how he saw the presidency as the world's greatest reality show, and a great reality show needs to have, heroes, in that case, him, and villains. He needs to. So when you're with him in person, he is. I mean, by the way, he has gotten very angry at me behind the scenes, and that's when you know he's truly upset. When he's berating you and the cameras aren't there to document it, that's when you know he's truly upset. But even then, it never really lasts because at root, Donald Trump, I believe, and I try not to be like a psychoanalyst here, but he wants to be loved, he wants to be liked, and he wants you to reaffirm that you like the guy. So he treats you really well, and doesn't stay angry. I mean, I'll never forget that during COVID, when we had those press conferences every day, and there were only 14 seats in the White House briefing room that were filled because of social distancing, and he just went after me in the most deeply personal way on national television, tens of millions of people watching.
Was that so
And
embarrassing for you? Or like it must
I
have
mean,
made you so uncomfortable?
the idea that a president of the United States is doing that to you, and you're a reporter who, is just there to try to, like, tell the story. You don't want to get in a fight with the president. You want to, like, do your job. But I had known him for so long. Somehow it, like, didn't really bother me. I just, like, ignored it and went on. But like a minute or two later, he comes back to me and calls on me again for another question, like nothing had just happened. And did you see, like, recently, I went back to the White House. I'm not there every day anymore. I went back to the White House, and Pam Bondi had just said that the Justice Department was going to start looking into prosecuting hate speech after Charlie Kirk. And a lot of Republicans, a lot of conservatives, a lot of Trump supporters think that's a terrible idea. That you don't, hate speech is free speech. You don't prosecute it. So I asked him, she says she's going to prosecute hate speech. All your supporters don't like it. What do you think of it? And he turns to me and he says, maybe she'll go after you because you have a lot of hate in your heart. And I didn't even, like, I swear I must like didn't even, like, hear it because I'm, like, into the next thing. And but in before he's done answering my question, he's asking me if I'm gonna take my beautiful wife out to dinner in Washington, D.C. now that he's, like, solved all the crime. I mean, it's like he doesn't process what he's done. And so, I don't know, it's bizarre.
You say that he really wants to be liked, he wants to be loved, he wants to be admired. But good Lord, I mean, have you ever seen someone go about wanting to be liked by behaving the way he does, by insulting people, by diminishing people, by, behaving the way he does? The pathology is so bizarro to me.
It's really, it's really something. I think that part of the attacks is he knows that it will please other people. Like, he knows that it's a crowd pleaser when he cuts down a reporter, or when he goes out and he says the things that he has said about his political opponents. I mean, the stuff he has said about Biden. I mean, we've never seen a president say that kind of stuff about a former president.
It's kind of understood that you don't even talk about the person who is the sitting president. I mean, that's kind of a standard operating procedure for former presidents to not criticize,
Yeah, and there's nothing standing
or not
operating.
criticize the current
Yeah.
administration, but also for the current administration to not really criticize a past administration, right?
Yeah, we never see anything like this. I mean, we never even see mild criticisms, and he's, putting the auto pen on display in
Yeah,
the in
that
in
is
the
that
colonnade.
is so creepy, and I mean, I'm sorry, I've kind of gone beyond trying to be impartial here, Jonathan, because his
Yeah,
behavior is so beyond the pale. This auto pen, so he posts, or he places presidential portraits along the hallway leading to the Oval Office, and the one he puts up of Joe Biden is an auto pen.
yeah.
I mean, it's so sophomoric, but it's also just so creepy, right?
One
I
one
mean, what is that?
I mean, one of the things one of the things I did in the book is I tried to really get to learn as much as I could about the private interactions that Joe Biden had with Donald Trump, and there were a number of them. The first one was a phone call that Biden made to Trump, the night of the shooting in Butler, and we knew that that had happened, and they had both put out statements. But I talked to two people who actually overheard the phone conversation, and it was about 5 or 6 minutes long. Trump was in his motorcade headed out of Butler after he had been to the hospital, and they spoke like they were old friends. And a lot of Joe and Donald, and Joe and Donald, and how are you? And it's great. And I mean, as friendly as you could possibly be. And then they meet again right after the election, where Joe Biden is affording a courtesy to Donald Trump that he never afforded to Joe Biden, of welcoming in the next president to the White House before the inauguration. And they met, as you remember, for 2.5 hours, no cameras present in the Oval Office. But I describe what happens when he arrives and the Bidens are waiting for him. And there's no Melania, so it's just Joe Biden. But Jill and Joe are there in that entrance near the diplomatic room and the residence of the White House. And Trump comes out, and again, I talked to people who witnessed this, and he's like, "Oh, such a beautiful couple. You're so beautiful." And they pause, and they go and they pose for pictures. And one of the pictures in the book, they just it's Joe and Jill and Donald, all smiles, next to the White House, posing like they've been old friends. They go in, they have that meeting. It's extraordinarily positive and
And
friendly. They
cordial.
playing golf together. We should play golf and all this stuff. And if we weren't political opponents, we'd probably be really good friends. I described that limousine ride that they took to the inauguration from the White House on January 20th, and kind of got inside the car. Again, I can't. And then he says these things about him in public, but so friendly, cordial. Stay in touch. Let me know if I can do anything for you. You've done such great things. And there you have what he says in public.
Why do you think, and again, is it because it plays well with his base? And how does Joe Biden, I don't know if have you talked to Joe Biden since he left the White House at all, John?
I talked to him recently. I have to say he was looking pretty good. He had just been through his.
Did you see him?
Yeah, I saw him. I saw him in person. I saw him in person.
Did you interview him?
No, it wasn't an interview. Just I saw him. I don't know if you if you saw that he was out to dinner in Washington D.C. He went out to dinner with a former Senator Mark Pryor at Cafe Milano. Sat right
Oh
there in
my
the dining
gosh.
room, right there in the dining room in front of everybody. I happened to be there, and you know who else was there was Barack Obama. who was
Oh my
also having
God.
dinner at Cafe Milano, but they didn't cross paths. They were, and it was wild seeing the Secret Service, the armored SUVs had to kind of like Biden's had to move to make room for Obama's. They didn't interact, but I went over and just had a few words with them, and
They didn't
um,
interact at all? They were in the same
no,
restaurant? What's
same,
their relationship like? That's weird that they
really,
didn't.
really bad, really bad.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, it's uh, the the Biden and the people around him very much blame Barack Obama for the effort to push Biden out of the campaign. I document this in
You
the
mean
book as
the
well. With
earlier one where Hillary ran instead, or you're talking about
no, no, no.
oh,
Well, that I mean that yes, but no, I'm talking
yes.
about this time around. I had extensive interviews with Hunter Biden for this book over the course of the campaign, and then after it was over. And Hunter Biden is just, he's got real anger towards Barack Obama, and I think he's channeling not just Hunter, but the Biden family. He believes that, for instance, the George Clooney op-ed that was such a big moment where Clooney calls on,
Right. Joe
Biden to
Biden to
drop
step
out.
down. Yeah.
And they say, he says to me on the record, Hunter says, "Do you really think that he would have done that if Barack Obama didn't say it was okay? I mean, do you really believe?" And remember that moment at that fundraiser in California where Obama basically leads Biden off the stage?
Yes, I do.
It was
Yes.
another real moment that went viral. Um, Hunter describes being there at that fundraiser and saying he wanted to jump up on the stage and say, "You don't grab the president of the United States like that. Nobody does." I mean, really like angry, knowing that it would become this moment. So it's not a good relationship. If they had wanted to see each other, they absolutely would have. They were
Gosh, that's sort
not
of
that far apart in the
that's
restaurant.
something, former president and his vice president, and then, who ultimately becomes president, not even speaking when they're at the same restaurant. I wanted to ask you, and then we'll get back to the book 'cause there's
Yeah.
so many things I want to talk to you about. But, do you think that Joe Biden or Hunter for that matter and Joe Biden's inner circle take any responsibility for the timing of his decision? And do you think they regret, n- his not being a one-term president and saying as much so the field could be open and the best candidate could run against Donald Trump? Do they have any, regrets about that?
The honest answer is not really. I mean, there's a little bit. I talked extensively with Hunter about this, and I asked him at what point was the decision made that he would run for reelection, and he said to me, we never really made the decision. The machinery just went, and I talked to other people in Biden's inner circle about how about at the White House. They never had a single meeting where they said, here are the pros and cons about running again. It was just like on autopilot. And I don't think that I think that the regret that they feel is that the party pushed him out and Kamala Harris comes in and she lost. Biden himself has said publicly that he believes that he could have won. By the way, when he finally made that decision and, he calls Kamala Harris and says he's dropping out, and I describe how Kamala Harris really pushes him to make the endorsement immediately, which he ultimately does, half an hour after he announces he's dropping out. And there's been a lot of talk about and reporting on how Kamala Harris sat down and made over 100 phone calls, to get people to support her campaign and to get started. But Biden made a whole bunch of phone calls that night too. You can imagine somebody, his whole career in politics, now it is over. He's run his last campaign. He calls the people that made it possible for him to be president, thanks them, encourages most of them to support Kamala Harris. I was astounded to hear that one person he did not call was Barack Obama, the person that really made it possible for him to be president by making him vice president. He didn't call him then. Obama did call, I learned, to talk to Biden. He didn't take the call, and the two of them did not speak for weeks. They eventually spoke right before the convention. But can you imagine? I mean, literally not taking the call.
So dysfunctional. Oncologists are often the central guide for patients and families facing a cancer diagnosis. Let's hear a bit more about what they specifically do, how they support patients and families, and why their work matters so deeply. Joining me to talk about the role of oncologists is Dr. Monica Shaw. She is Senior Vice President of Global Oncology Commercialization at Bristol Myers Squibb.
Thank you, Katie, so much for having me here today to discuss this important topic. It's really incredible to think that a single oncologist will probably have to give that bad news 20,000 times in their career. It's important to remember that it's not just the bad news that they give, that they're often also responsible for letting people know about those additional precious moments of time that people will be able to spend with their friends and family.
I read that in the mid-1970s, the 5-year relative survival rate for all cancers combined was about 49%, and it's increased to around 69% in recent years.
And that's why we're really excited to bring this new campaign, Time Back. It's important to recognize that they're also part of the positive moments of the journey.
Dr. Monica Shaw, thank you so much.
So, Katie, if you or your viewers would like to learn more, please come and visit us at bms.com/timeback, and you can learn more there about our commitment to oncologists and the time back that they potentially can give to patients.
As we've heard, oncologists' work extends far beyond medicine. It's about the valuable time and key life moments they can help give back, and they deserve our deepest gratitude. Time is the greatest gift we can give and receive. As we turn the clocks back this fall, Bristol Myers Squibb is recognizing oncologists who help give patients something extraordinary: more time. The Time Back campaign celebrates those everyday heroes who are working tirelessly in the pursuit of potentially helping give patients more time to experience key moments, like seeing a child learn to ride a bike or a long-awaited vacation. As we turn back our clocks, let's pause to thank the doctors who make a difference every day. Discover more about the Time Back campaign and join Bristol Myers Squibb in celebrating the physicians who give the gift of more time at bms.com/timeback. Let's get back to Donald Trump, though, because that's what your book is about, Retribution.
Yeah.
And the first chapter is called Felon and Frontrunner. And you spent a lot of time, John, at the courthouse in New York covering Donald Trump's hush money trial. Tell us why you believe this really solidified his retribution mindset, that whole court case, and if you think that was a legitimate case against Donald Trump, because it's now been massaged into a specious law, a specious trial by his supporters, and something that shows what a crook he was by those who oppose him.
Yeah. So on the first thing on how it solidified his retribution, you have to realize that for 6 weeks, he was compelled to be and sit in that courtroom silently. 4 days a week. Court's not in session on Wednesday. 4 days a week, he has to go to 100 Center Street in Lower Manhattan. It is a dingy, dark, dirty courthouse that hasn't been renovated, in decades. It looks like it hasn't had a deep cleaning in decades. I described when I walked in, the first thing I noticed is there's this big frickin' rat trap, those plastic rat traps by the front entrance. There are signs that say warning, asbestos, the light, the flickering fluorescent lights, the dirty marble, floors, and the elevators that are kind of dysfunctional, and sometimes you have to take 2 elevators because one bank isn't working. And he has to go there. He has to stand at attention when the judge enters the room. He has to sit there through deeply embarrassing testimony Stormy Daniels talking about their interaction. Michael Cohen saying, his former fixer saying the most horrible things about him. He has to sit there and cannot leave. He's technically under arrest. And I think it just solidified. I mean, he was hell-bent on retribution before. He wanted not just to come back to be president again, he wanted to get even at those who he felt had betrayed him, those that had gone after him. But now it's burning in him every day. And look, in terms of that case, it was a bizarre case. Let's be honest. It was a totally bizarre case. I mean, what were they prosecuting him for? It wasn't for the hush money itself. He called it for an accounting issue. And in a way, it really was. It was, he paid her $130,000. There's nothing illegal about paying hush money, but they
There
said
isn't?
that no. There's absolutely nothing as long as you're, you account for it properly. The issue was that, he accounted for it as a legal expense because it was Michael Cohen that physically made the payment, and he's reimbursing Michael Cohen for it. And he's not, and the argument that they're making is it was basically a campaign expense. So he's violating campaign finance laws as well as having a fraudulent accounting by not saying what it really was, because it was done so it wouldn't hurt his campaign. So the revelation wouldn't come out and hurt his campaign. Look, this is a guy that has been indicted for pilfering the nation's most sensitive military secrets from the White House and for leaving them around, the bathroom and ballroom at Mar-a-Lago, and for talking about classified information with, an Australian buddy at the club, and for a journalist, and for one of his. He's a guy that is indicted for overturning American democracy, and he's on trial for improperly accounting for hush money to a porn star. Whatever. Even if you think it's an okay case, it
But
pales
the
in
jurors
significance.
but he was found guilty, right?
He was convicted. He was found guilty. I'm just saying, because it was such a bizarre case and hard for the public really to understand why this was being done, it was easier to make himself out to be a victim, and he's not being held accountable for the far more serious alleged crimes that he committed as president of the United States.
I know that the seeds of his retribution fixation were planted even earlier. You write, after his lonely departure from the White House in 2021, Trump was detested by elites of all kinds in the world of politics, yes, but also in business, law, academia, and media. Hatred of those elites quickly became the driving force of Trump's 2024 campaign. I think it's really interesting because I think all his life, or his adult life, he has felt like an outsider. I think, as somebody who's lived in New York for decades now, he was always seen as kind of rich and full of himself and kind of harmless buffoon, I would say, by sort of the upper crust of New York society. But he was never really welcomed into that group. He was always a bit.
He was the guy from Queens. He was the
Yeah,
the guy that was trying to
exactly.
make it in Manhattan from Queens.
But how did that bitterness and resentment fuel him, particularly during this second campaign and now the second term of his presidency?
It was the driving force, and it really propelled him to run for office again. And you remember he announced he was running for president in 2022, a week after Republicans suffered a series of losses in midterm elections that were blamed on Trump. And his own advisors were telling him, wait, just let the dust settle. And he charged ahead because he was so focused on proving those people wrong. Think about how he left the White House. Not just the fact that he tried so hard to overturn the election, looked like a sore loser. He was condemned by the leaders in his own party, the impeachment, the Senate trial, all of that. But it's more than that. He was banished from Twitter. He was banned from Instagram and Facebook. The leaders of the nation's of the biggest corporations had, most of them, almost all of them who give political donations, announced that they would not be donating to any candidate who had supported Donald Trump's effort to overturn the election. Law firms, he was facing the legal trials. The nation's top law firms refused to represent him. Todd Blanche, who did, take up, become basically his lead counsel in that hush money case and also in the federal cases. Todd Blanche was with a top, Manhattan firm, and he had to leave the firm, go out on his own to represent Donald Trump. So yeah, he sees all of these people, not just the Democrats, not just the prosecutors that, brought the cases against him, but all those other people who, tried to banish him, cancel him, if you want to use that term. He's hell-bent on getting back at them and proving them wrong. And if they're going to come back and right the wrong, he'll bring them back
And
in. So he's bloody.
genuflect, like,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
All the tech titans genuflecting, right?
Yeah. There was a moment in during the campaign where he actually speculated that Mark Zuckerberg should go to prison. Now Mark Zuckerberg's a somewhat regular guest at Mar-a-Lago in the White House.
How would you compare the two terms so far? I mean, obviously, you talk about the first term as remarkably ephemeral, which you can
Yeah.
explain what that means. And the second term, as we all know, is shaping up to be far more radical and consequential. So, can you talk a little bit, John, about your observations on the first term versus the second? I mean, I'm sure it's about the people he surrounded himself with. He was, as you write, seeking legitimacy in his first term, and now all he cares about is loyalty.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it, and there's a lot more to it. I mean, I was there at the White House. I was actually ended up being president of the White House Correspondents Association while he's president. I was obviously there for ABC, covering day in and day out. It was constant activity, just like it is today. Um, the eyes of the world seem to be on that White House. I think to a greater extent than even they are today. I think today a lot of people avert their gaze and they're sick of it, and they try to pretend it's not happening and aren't. But at that moment, everybody was like, "What's going to happen? The guys won," and it was constant activity, chaos. I wrote that first book I wrote was called Front Row at the Trump Show because I believe that he saw the presidency as the world's greatest reality show, and he was programming it. I said he was the star, he was the executive producer, he was the publicist, he was the spokesperson for the Trump Show, and he did put together amazing spectacles that kept the attention on the White House. I think the greatest was probably when he met with Kim Jong-un in Singapore. I mean, this guy that had been the great pariah and no American president, had ever met. And he's like welcoming him as his buddy in Singapore. But none of it had any lasting impact, I don't think. I mean, there were a few things in his first term and a few accomplishments. The Abraham Accords, probably the one overriding big accomplishment. But for the most part, Biden comes in and all the stuff that happened, all that attention, all that, it's just like gone. Now he's coming in, and I think he's really sensing something he didn't see before, which is his own mortality. And he wants to change the world, not just be the center of attention. That's why he's building a 90,000 square foot ballroom at the White House. That's why he's desperate to get the Nobel Peace Prize. That's why he's transforming much of the rest of the White House. He wants people to confront the fact that he's there and the world is not going to be the same, because he was there. He's changing the world. And a big part of it is what you mentioned. I mean, he had people with real credentials that were around him. Even the non-traditional people. Rex Tillerson was the Secretary of State. Very unusual choice for Secretary of State. But he'd been the CEO of ExxonMobil. This is a serious guy.
Right.
Jeff Sessions, he was a judge. He was a senator, influential senator, very influential senator.
General
He's
Mattis.
General Mattis at the Pentagon, General Kelly at the Department of Homeland Security, 4-star Marines with really, but every one of those people in Trump's mind betrayed him. So he didn't give a damn about credentials in the same way when he's putting together his administration this time. He cares about loyalty. And that makes him, I make the case, and I think it's absolutely true, it's why I make it, that he's the most powerful president that we have had in the modern era, because he's empowered by a Supreme Court decision that says that essentially he can't be prosecuted.
I mean, you say powerful, other people might say unchecked.
Unchecked. Yeah, that's fair. Because he's not checked in the same way by the courts, although, he is checked to a degree by the courts. And by the way, watch what happens at the Supreme Court on tariffs, because he is taking and seizing power that he actually doesn't have under the Constitution. And one of the biggest examples of that is he's just imposing tariffs left and right. Congress has the power to impose taxes and duties.
The power of the purse, right? But Congress has become the weakest branch of the government.
Steve Bannon the other day said that the U.S. Congress is like the Russian Duma. Trump has just operated through executive power, executive orders, and when he's had to go through Congress, although now we're in the midst of a shutdown, we'll see where this goes, but the Republicans have, with the exception of like 2 or 3 people out of, in the House and the Senate, have just done whatever he wants. And,
I guess there are a few that have spoken out against tariffs, right? A handful of Republicans in Congress, but
he's done it he's bypassed Congress to do that. So is the Supreme Court going to say to him, are they going to rule that no, those tariffs are unconstitutional? I think, Katie, there's a real possibility that they do. And that'll be a game-changing moment for Trump. Think about all the time he has, first of all, he's talked about tariffs now. He calls them so central, and it's not just an instrument of like managing trade, but it's an instrument of foreign policy. It's an instrument of retribution for him, punishing Brazil, rewarding his friends. So imagine if that gets taken away and undone. And I think there's a real possibility it will be, even this Supreme Court.
I'm curious, when you look at those cabinet meetings that are, sprayed by the White House, pool, and you see them going around the table just gushing about Trump, every single one of them. It's so grotesque, but it's also just so weird to me that none of these people is embarrassed or ashamed or uncomfortable with having to fawn all over him. It's just so weird. You've covered many administrations. I'm older than you are, so I've been around even longer, and it's just so bizarre to me that they think this is palatable, and that don't you ever think, or does nothing ever surprise you at this point?
I remember the very first cabinet meeting he had in 2017, and they went around the table and gushed and praised about him. General Mattis, who you mentioned, was one of the few, Kelly too, by the way, that didn't do that. He praised the troops. He's defense secretary, and he talked about the greatness of American service members. But he later told me, much longer after, that he had a feeling at that very first cabinet meeting in 2017 that was like it was North Korea vibes. It was like the way Kim Jong-un is likely to be greeted when he convenes the North Korean Politburo. But it's gotten much more so since that first. There's a picture that I put in the book of the very first Trump cabinet meeting this time. and he walks in, the cabinet is already seated, and the picture is taking place as he walks into the cabinet room, and they all stand, and they're all applauding him. They're applauding him. I mean, can you imagine, like, John Kennedy, like, being, President Kennedy being applauded, or I mean, but by his own cabinet? Coming as you're meeting to talk about, like, your agenda? And yeah, but, it's not just his cabinet, it's when he's meeting with congressional leaders. It's when he's meeting with foreign leaders who they watched what happened to Zelensky, and it's all preceded by how wonderful he is.
Tell me what you think are some of the biggest scoops in the book, John. I know you have a number of them, of Kristi Noem, and how he appointed her to Secretary of Homeland Security as a favor to Corey Lewandowski. And also Pete Hegseth was really his idea. Talk about sort of some of the things you discovered through your reporting in the course of writing this book. And you
I
tell us more about Kristi Noem. Is she a couple with Corey Lewandowski? I mean, what's going on with those two?
I'll have to leave others to answer that question. They certainly have a very close relationship.
Isn't
And
Kristi Noem married, or am I?
they both are married and not to each other.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, there was a member of Trump's transition team who was totally surprised when Trump announced. He often surprises the people that work for him. When he announced, he put out the statement that Kristi Noem was going to be his choice for Homeland Security, and this person just asked him, "Well, so why'd you decide to do that?" And his answer was, "I did it for Corey." It's the only thing he asked for. Corey was his first campaign manager. He just asked for one thing. Just one thing. I mean, it's got to give it to him. And I sat down for an extensive interview with Steve Bannon 2 days after Kristi Noem was announced as Trump's choice for Homeland Security, and he was exasperated. This is all on the record. I actually put the sound of the interview because Bannon is so riled up telling me this in the audiobook. And he says, "What? She has no experience whatsoever. She's gonna be in charge of the war on terror, the Secret Service, the border. She's gonna be in charge of it all. Are you kidding me?" And the interesting thing and very revealing thing is that Bannon, although he is furious at this announcement, he doesn't blame Trump, who made the announcement. He blames Corey Lewandowski. He says, it was irresponsible of him to to ask Trump to do this. But in terms of the scoops in the books, first of all, I believe the book is much more than the kind of collection of the scoops. But there was a lot of new reporting that a lot of things that I learned as I went back to try to get answers that I couldn't get in real time as the events were happening. And I spent a great deal of time deconstructing the transition, that period where Trump is operating almost exclusively out of Mar-a-Lago, which is you've been there, I believe. You've been to Mar-a-Lago, haven't you?
I went to his wedding, John.
Right. So you know how small it is. I mean, it's not a very big place. It's a private club. It doesn't have office space. There's one office, it's his, but it's not the kind of place that you can run a big, complex presidential transition. They had a place to do that in West Palm Beach, a couple miles away, but everybody knew that the only thing that was ultimately going to matter is what Trump himself was doing. So Mar-a-Lago became this like crossroads at the center of the political universe. And I describe some just mind-blowing scenes of these would-be, wannabe cabinet secretaries and other people that wanted jobs in the administration coming and trying to get time with the king, trying to get time with Trump, and the way it was all operating. And there's like one scene where, Mar-a-Lago, when you go in, basically the lobby is a place they call the living room. And there's a couch there and a couple of chairs. And you have all these people waiting for their time to come in to talk to Trump. There was an attorney general candidate. There was a candidate for Secretary of Energy. Pete Hegseth was sitting there. You know, Kash Patel's kind of running around back and forth, hoping to get a little bit of FaceTime with Trump. All these things are happening. And one of the potential cabinet secretaries that was there sees Pete Hegseth and says, "Oh, God, I guess Trump's getting interviewed by, the Fox weekend news anchor." And little did anybody knew, like later, the next day we learned that he's the choice for Secretary of Defense. So a lot of the description of that, that incredible transition unlike any we had ever seen, I think is an important part of the book.
Do you worry that people are just OD'd on this? As you mentioned, some people are just tuning out. I mean, there have been many books written about Donald Trump. He never ceases to frustrate, amaze, and, infuriate people. And at some point, do you worry that, I think as a news person, as a journalist, that people will stop paying attention, and B, that they're not going to really want to read this book?
Yeah, I mean, look, I felt it was absolutely essential. I didn't plan to write another book until really when Biden dropped out. I was like, I need to write about this campaign. It's the most extraordinary, unpredictable twists and turns campaign that we had ever seen in our lifetimes. I think you have to go back to maybe 1912 to find something close when, Teddy Roosevelt stormed out of the Republican convention and started the Bull Moose Party. I mean, but this is like an incredible series of events, and I wanted to document it for history because I knew that I had access to some of the key players in a way that really nobody else did, or very few people did, and I wanted to. And it was just for myself. I wanted to kind of get an understanding of what happened. But yes, the short answer is absolutely. I worry that people have largely tuned out. They're exhausted with it all. We're a decade into this now, a decade into the Trump era. And, I hope people read the book because I think it's an important record of how we got to where we are and what is at stake going forward. But I know that a lot of people are going to say, I've heard too much. I'm just going to ignore it all. But you know what? We can't ignore it all.
Let's talk about, for the last few minutes we have, John, about the future. We're doing this interview on Election Day.
Yeah.
There's some key races going on, which might provide some insight on how the electorate is feeling about Donald Trump at the moment, especially with races in New York City, the mayoral race. We've got Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger, who are favored to win in New Jersey and Virginia, respectively. And I'm curious, do you have any sense at this point, John, about the mood of the electorate and the enthusiasm for Donald Trump, even among his MAGA base?
There's clearly anxiety in the country about the state of the economy, which was a big part of what got him elected. The rejection of Biden, it was for several reasons. I mean, it wasn't. Part of it was his age, part of it was the failure in Afghanistan, part of it was the mess at the border, but a big driving force that was a drag on Kamala Harris was, inflation and the state of the economy.
And insisting the economy was doing well by, the numbers. But as people have pointed out, it's more of a feeling, kind of the same thing as crime and safety. Like no matter what you're being told, if you don't feel it to be the case, it just doesn't resonate. So the economy, and people feel like the economy hasn't really improved. In fact, for so many of his voters and people who supported him, it's gotten much worse, right? I mean, look at farmers and soybean farmers and the impact tariffs are having, and inflation, et cetera, et cetera. So do you think he's starting to wear thin among some of his folks?
I think that you're clearly seeing that in the polls. He still is popular among the overwhelming majority of Republican voters. But there is growing economic anxiety And I think that his obsession with retribution and his obsession with what seem to be trivial things like changing the White House, all the gold at the White House, tearing down the East Wing at a time when Americans are wondering if they, if they have enough money to feed their families, are wondering about the strength of their jobs. The unemployment rate is still low, but there's so much anxiety about, major companies, announcing large number of layoffs.
And
Um,
AI.
what AI does to the job market. How many jobs does it eat away? The federal employees, what's happened to them. So you know, not to mention this government shutdown that Republicans are blaming on Democrats, and they've got an argument that it was Democrats that caused the shutdown. I mean, I don't think many people really care about that argument. But they care about what it means to their lives, and you know, you've got millions of people that are on SNAP that depend on food stamps to feed their families. A lot of those
Well,
are
that's why
Republicans, by the way.
Yeah, that's why I don't understand, John. Like, he does this $350 million renovation.
Yeah,
He renovates the Lincoln bathroom, right, with all marble and gold. And these constant displays of ostentatiousness, if that's the right word, and,
yeah,
having a great Gatsby party at
yeah.
Mar-a-Lago, the weekend SNAP benefits run out. And I'm just curious why even MAGA voters don't see that as a bit of a disconnect. How can he convey that he still really cares about the working class or people who are struggling in the country, and then and yet display all these, constant signs of ostentatious wealth and spending on things that really don't help people, but are really just self-aggrandizing?
It's a great question, and I have to say one of the unique things about Trump is that where most politicians, even very wealthy ones, and we've had very wealthy people become president of the United States, become senator, become governors, try to hide their wealth or de-emphasize it and try to act like a regular person, regular man, regular woman, even when they're multimillionaires, billionaires. Uh, Trump never did any of that. I remember, you know, when he was first running and he goes to the Iowa State Fair. This is where you eat the corn dogs and you show you're just like everybody else. And what does he do? He brings his helicopter with the big Trump sign on, emblazoned, and gives helicopter rides to the kids. I mean, he never tried to pretend that he wasn't. I mean, if anything, he was pretending to be richer than he was. And his people, who were largely, working class Americans, struggling, drawn to him because they feel like they've been uh, not been served well by the political elites in both parties, were drawn to him. And part of his argument was, I became super rich. I did it all for myself. Now I'm going to do it for you. I'm going to do it for the country. So I think there's still a little bit of that in the psychology of his supporters. He's doing greatness. He's doing it on behalf of America. He's going to have this big ballroom. It's going to be all of ours. He's going to the big Arc de Triomphe that he's going to put, by the Lincoln Memorial. This greatness. He's doing it now for America. And even as you're struggling to figure out, how you're going to make ends meet, a lot of them will be there and will be there until his dying days and their dying days.
I'd love you to just end by talking about the future. I mean, I know that this was about the campaign, but as we look ahead at the midterms, John,
Yeah.
and especially at this kind of quid pro quo redistricting fight that we see unfolding all across the country. The last I heard, it's going to be a net gain for the Republicans in terms of additional House seats. How do you see the midterm shaking out? It's probably hard to predict, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
but but tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in the country, what you're seeing in races, and what you believe may in fact happening, especially with this whole redistricting thing layer added to the to the mix.
Yeah, the redistricting could make it possible for the Republicans to
Hold on to the House.
to hold like about 10 seats or so that they to get squeeze an extra, you know 10 districts that would go from being Democratic to being majority Republican, across Texas, Indiana, North Carolina, Florida. I mean, Florida, they're probably not going to pull off, but they're trying in every state where they can. Texas is the only, California is the only state where where Democrats are able to squeeze some seats themselves, and that's
Well,
5.
no, the other states are looking into it,
Well,
right? Virginia, New York. I just watched a piece done by the New York Times, and
yeah.
and I think that's not right. California is not the only one, is it?
Well, it's likely to be the only one that can pull it off. In New York, there's a real question about whether or not they can do it. In
Because
Virginia,
of the
there's a real question about
Constitution.
yes. So they've got barriers in all those states that are going to be very hard to overcome. And the one place, depending on how the voting goes, in California, where they can actually do it, where they will have a green light to do it, is California. And the others, I mean, we'll see how it plays out. They're running out of time to be able to do it in Virginia and in New York. But look, he has not done well for Republicans when he is not on the ballot. In 2022, Republicans held the House, but they lost a whole bunch of seats, and they lost a lot of, Senate seats that they thought they were going to win. They lost governorships. In 2018, Republicans got hammered while Trump was in the
Well,
White House.
that's pretty predictable, right?
It's
Usually they do get hammered in the midterms. But what do you think's going to happen next year for the midterms now? You mentioned the redistricting, right?
Yeah.
Is it going to be a huge shellacking, as Barack Obama, I believe, said, right? After his
That's what he said
midterms.
after 2010, or was it 2014? He got shellacked twice, Obama. It's very predictable that happens. What the redistricting does is it makes the playing field much smaller. There are fewer seats that Democrats can really compete for to win. But I'll just tell you what I asked Gavin Newsom about this, because Gavin Newsom is obviously the one that is pushing to make the change in California to counter what's happened in Texas and elsewhere. And I asked Gavin Newsom basically the question you're asking me, which is, do you need to win this ballot initiative, this Prop 50? Do you need to do this in California for the Democrats to have a chance of holding on to the House?
You mean getting back the House?
Getting back the House, right? Getting back the House. And he said, actually, no. He thinks that there will be such a wave election that the 5 extra seats that they squeeze out of California, assuming they do, will be a footnote. So who knows? But Trump's approval rating in this latest CNN poll is lower than it had ever been, even in the darkest moments of his first term. An incumbent with economic headwinds, with anxiety in the country, as unpopular as he is in that poll, if that remains, all the redistricting in the world might not be enough to hold the tide. So we'll see. And I think that this election, Virginia, New Jersey, New York, will be a bit of a leading indicator of where the party and where the Congress is going to go next year in the midterms.
And the big question, I guess, is also, will the Democrats be able to get their act together and provide a compelling vision for the country instead of being the anti-Trump party?
Yeah. Right now, they're a long way from doing that.
I love talking to you. I mean, I could talk to you about this stuff all day, John, preferably next time over a vodka martini at Cafe Milano. But the book is called Retribution, Donald Trump and the Campaign That Changed America. So much to talk about. And God bless you for covering this day in and day out, because honestly, I'd want to blow my brains out at some point.
Katie, it's awesome to talk to you, and I look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Yeah,
really,
me
really
too.
great talking to you.
Good luck with the book, and keep up the good work, because God knows I'm paying attention, John, to everything you write and talk about, and I hope most Americans are, because I don't think I've lived through a time where it's more important to really understand what's going on. I wasn't around in 1912
Yeah.
to cover Teddy
Neither
Roosevelt.
was I. It would have been a great race to cover, though. Yeah.
It would have been, but enough excitement just covering this administration. John,
Yeah.
thanks again, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Katie.